Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. I'm Catherine Reynolds-Lewis here with my colleague, Erika Hayaski. How's it going, Erika?
Good. How are you?
Good. I love this interview with Clarissa León, Deputy Editor at Documented. What stood out for you?
We had a great interview. It was interesting to talk to Clarissa, who is an editor over at Documented and takes pitches from a range of freelancers as long as your stories are somehow associated with New York. But she also works obviously with a lot of New York-based freelancers and is open to new freelancers, students, recent graduates. And I think that was a good part of our interview.
Yeah, it surprised me that they're not just covering sort of immigration and immigrants from a lens of enforcement, but the whole range of life for immigrants in New York City, how they can sort of be civically engaged and all the different guides that they have to navigating the city bureaucracy. And of course, they publish in multiple languages, English, Spanish, Haitian Creole, and Chinese. So lots of opportunity for folks, and they seem to be a great outlet.
Yeah, she seemed like a wonderful editor to write for and to pitch.
So learn more in this episode about how to pitch Documented, Newspegs, data, access, the kinds of things you need to be successful.
Welcome to the Freelance Journalism Podcast. I am Erika Hayaski, and I'm here with the wonderful Clarissa A. León, a Colombian-American journalist, editor, writer, and educator based in New Jersey. She currently serves as deputy editor at Documented, New York's leading source for immigration news. And with nearly 2 decades of experience, she's edited and reported for numerous labor and social justice outlets with bylines in Newsweek, The Nation, Salon, and many others. Welcome. Thank you for being here, Clarissa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about Documented for the IIJ. By the way, the Institute for Independent Journalists mission, as you know, is the financial and emotional sustainability for freelancers of color. And we're just so glad you're here to tell us about the work that you do at Documented. So I'd love to start there, if you're okay with that.
Absolutely.
Explain
Yeah.
to us the background of Documented, how it came to be, and then your role there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Documented started in 2018 it was kind of like a startup back then with Mazen and Max Siegelbaum, Mazen Saddam and Max Siegelbaum as the co-founders. And then they basically kind of looked at the media landscape in New York and figured out that, a lot of the media was talking about immigrants, but not talking with them, right? And trying to serve the immigrant community in New York, which is huge, right? So they saw that there was a real lack of accessibility in terms of news for those particular communities, and they decided to start up Documented. So what makes Documented a little different is that we publish in 3 different languages as of now. So we publish in English, actually 4, sorry. We publish in English, we publish in Spanish, and we also publish in Haitian Creole and in Chinese. And so it isn't to say that we wouldn't publish in other languages, but because we started with kind of like the largest immigrant communities, we're able to reach so many of them at their language. And so a lot of the reporting that we do and the guides and resources that we do get translated into those languages.
That's great. And Can you tell us also about your role and what you oversee?
Yes, absolutely. So I came on in December 2022, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, December 2022. And it was part of the strategic vision to kind of get some editing help. I am the deputy editor at Documented. And what I do is essentially all things kind of editing, editorial. So I'm looking at the reported side of stories, and I do work with a lot of freelancers.
Mm-hmm.
Part of some of my other role is to kind of oversee kind of how Documented is looking at our objectives in terms of reaching the immigrant community, right? So sometimes when we get stories, there's that editorial judgment call that I have to make, along with the other editors, of course, in terms of, is this a documented story that we want to be covering? And right now, that is kind of a challenging aspect given the news today. We have a lot of outlets who, before, this administration, and even beforehand, immigration wasn't really a topic that they would want to invest in. And so at Documented, that's all that we kind of look at. We look at immigrants, we look at immigration. And as a result of that, some of our, I guess, turf as being encroached upon in terms of what do we cover if everybody else is covering kind of the same thing? What are the angles that we are looking at? But I think at the end of the day, we still kind of go back to our mission statement, which is we're here to serve, the immigrant community. So if there's a story out there, how is it that it's, first and foremost, what is it doing in order to advance their needs, right? And to help them, right, in terms of navigating the immigrant pathways in New York City. Right. And also to kind of live a flourishing, civically engaged life, right, in New York City, which is more challenging than you would imagine, right? But because of, because of so many other people, we have all these ICE raids, we have all these different news stories that are coming out from the immigration front. We have to be very selective in terms of what we're looking at. So that's part of my role as well in terms of being a deputy editor here. And it definitely grows. I will say, in terms of what my role does, it definitely expands every day.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. It sounds like it's ever shifting as the news is also changing. And like you're saying, so many people are covering immigration in different ways. And what is your role there? So maybe you can talk about how you've started to think about the kinds of stories that would make for a documented story, and how journalists who want to pitch you can also think of those ideas for you.
Yeah, sure. So I will say we have a new editor-in-chief, Ether Katani, and she started not this last October, but the October before. So she's been here a little over a year. And before that, we were still a relatively small staff, and we didn't work with freelancers as much. We kind of had staff writers who were community correspondents, and they did, I would like to call them kind of like reporters plus, like reporters, super reporters, because they not only were doing reporting, but they were also doing guides and resources and meeting with the communities that they were cover. So April Shu, she's out there with the Chinese community, and getting stories from them and writing guides and resources from them. And then Ramel Ojeda, also the same thing with the Spanish-speaking community. And Ralph Joseph, he's the longest name here. He also working with the Caribbean community. So we primarily worked within house. But when Ethar began, she wanted to kind of really build up that nimbleness with freelancers in terms of there is a lot of immigration news out there, and we can't cover it all with just our small staff who's kind of doing double duty already. Our staff has grown as a result of some of this news, but the ways in which we want to access the news has also grown, and which is why we're kind of heading up to looking at freelance pitches here and there. So in terms of kind of what makes a documented story, it's challenging to say, because some of our mission and the news has changed so much. So some of it is, yes, we want to be more timely with the news. It's true, because we are trying to compete with the other news outlets here and there. So, but at the same time, we are not trying necessarily to be the first on the scene of like an ICE raid per se, right? We're not going to be covering every type of raid out there, or every type of suspicious news from the administration, just because it's how should I say this? It doesn't always pan out, right? So we have to be really mindful of where our energies are spent. But a documented story, I think, to kind of to say, if I could sum it up, we're really trying to find stories that center immigrants, right? and the immigrant story. And if I could kind of give a comparison of a story here, it's like, we have Eileen Grench, who is our latest immigration enforcement reporter. She joined us not about like this last October, so she's fairly new. She covers immigration enforcement, so she might write a story about ICE and in Federal Plaza, right? But Ramel, our Spanish-speaking community correspondent, or the community correspondent for the Latino community, might be trying to find somebody like a family within that who's been impacted, right? Mm-hmm. And I think more often than not, if we have a freelancer pitching us, we're going to be looking for, do you have a specific immigrant, who was impacted, or a family or something to that effect, to show how these policy changes are really impacting the immigrant community within New York. And I will say we have also branched out to New Jersey. So we try to do a little bit of both here and there, and both are kind of okay in terms of what you can pitch, right? I would say we're not really looking for the very, quick hit in terms of story. So Eileen's story, for instance, even if you pitch that and you were at Federal Plaza, yes, we might want to have the 500-word story that same day if you can get it. But if you're a freelancer, most likely I would like to see something that's a little bit more thought out in terms of what's the new thing about this particular, event that's happening, or what's the new policy change that's really going to be impacting, or something that, our communities would really want to know about. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we do get pitches where, because they think documented covers just immigrants and immigration, they'll be really topic based, and they'll say, I will talk to immigrants, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that is supposedly the thing that is supposed to grab our attention. We're talking with immigrants day in and day out, right? So they have to be very, they have to be stories, if you're going to be pitching us, that are really something that is representative of the community as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Or they have to be stories that are so unique and engaging that we can really write a narrative or story through line with that. But just by the fact that it's, an immigrant or topic of immigration alone doesn't really pique our interest too much. And I will say one thing I'd kind of left out is that what Documented has, which is somewhat unique to our journalistic model, is we have channels that we speak with immigrants, right, that we've developed over the years. So we try to publish stories on, for instance, WhatsApp with the Latino community, because a lot of them are on that kind of platform. WeChat for the Chinese community, a lot of them are on that platform. And the same thing with Nextdoor for the Caribbean community. And that allows us to really see what is it that they're asking in terms of questions for immigration status, certain policies, things like that. And then it allows us to kind of also get some survey questions asked to them, right? Like, do you have anybody who's, been working through this X, Y, and Z, right? Because we'd like to talk to them. And that really helps us with our journalism, in that we're able to kind of build a trust with the communities, as well as gather stories that are important for them, right? And report on stories that they want to know about.
Yeah, that's great. It sounds like you're really meeting the community where they're at already as a publication. And then for freelancers coming in, how many staff writers do you have approximately, or staff, I guess, members?
So we've grown staff writers, reporters,
or editors and staff writers.
I mean, so we have, sorry, I'm going to count them in my head, because we have 3 like community correspondents who are now doing more of the reporting work, right? And they were doing a lot of other things too. And then we have 2 other community correspondents who are doing more of the community engagement work, and they write a lot of the resources and guides. So we do both reported stories as well as guides and resources, which are one of the best things about Documented, honestly. For instance, like, where do you how do you apply for a food license or something like that? Like
Yeah.
we can work on that. And then we also have our immigration enforcement reporter and our labor reporter, Amir. So there's really like seven, I would say, staffers who are tasked with writing day in
Yeah.
and day out. Yeah.
So it's important for a freelancer to understand that there are people already, on the ground who are working on stories that for documented. And so when you're coming with a pitch, you need to know, A, it's not like the breaking news that you're going to see already maybe covered. They have to have some new angle, maybe some inside kind of
Hmm.
information, the link or idea that will be original to you that you can use
Yeah.
in your reporting and publishing that
Yeah.
wouldn't already be covered.
Absolutely. And I
Um,
will say, just to add on to that, even if you don't have the new angle, sometimes and I think for documented, what's misunderstood too is that with the speed thing. So a lot of
yeah,
times people come to us with like long form story pitches and things like
sure.
that. And that's really great. But also at the same time, it doesn't hurt if you're a freelancer who's looking to deliver newsy things as well.
Yeah,
Especially for our team, like I said, there's about seven of us. We can't always be down at, Canal Street, right? When things happen, right? Or Federal Plaza when things happen. So, or
hmm,
for instance, I didn't send this story to you, but for instance, when the mayor was the election, right? We can't always get access to being at the city everywhere and all at once. So it's nice to be able to say, hey, I can write this and quickly for you guys if you
yeah,
need it. Hmm.
yeah. So sometimes breaking news that you can do quickly, but also enterprise is really
Yeah,
important.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
well,
yeah.
journalists can do all of those things. It's just a matter of knowing like the kinds of stories. So for a pitch, is there like an ideal way to pitch documented? Do they pitch you directly? Do they discuss exactly what they're envisioning for the story? Like how do you get a pitch
Yeah.
convinced?
So we recently worked on trying on getting a pitch form started. So if you go to and it's kind of hard to find. But if you go down to the bottom of our website, under the quick links, there's a link for pitch us a story, right? Write for us. And so that'll take you to a form where you can enter in all of the pitch, right? So it's really short, just write 2 to 3 paragraphs, what the sources you have, kind of the news peg, why would it be a documented story? This helps us tremendously if it's done through the form. At the same
Yeah,
time, once you've kind of gotten through that form and you've developed a relationship with documented, you are more than welcome to kind of skip the form so you had like an urgent pitch and email the editor, myself
mhm,
or whomever directly. And that's kind of it.
yeah,
Yeah, I will say I think that for there are some guidelines in terms of, on that page, on that link that I can share that with you later. We do
yeah.
publish mostly written stories. We do also take freelance pitches for photography or short form or social media. We don't publish
Hmm.
that as much or take that as much. But well, yeah, that's the one thing I was going to say. If it's something that's urgent, you can say that it's urgent within that pitch form. But if
Hmm.
for some reason you don't think we're going to get back to you that same day, or if you need it earlier than that, I wouldn't be completely opposed to pitching or trying to find our email pitching us directly. And I think all of our emails are pretty available.
Yeah,
But I do think that the same thing with the writers. We have a small staff of, writers. We also have a fairly smaller staff of editors. So we're also doing a lot of work in terms of filtering all through the pitches day in
all
and
the
day out.
pitches
Yeah.
that
Sometimes
you
we
have.
can miss things. Yeah.
Yeah. Approximately how many of the stories that you publish are freelance usually, or
Yeah, well,
all?
I tried to calculate this. I would say it's getting kind of like maybe 60-40 in terms of
Hmm.
60% are staffers and 40%
Okay,
maybe pitches. It's definitely
sure.
grows during times when like for instance, in the holidays, a lot of the staffers are out, so we'll need it. We solicit pitches for the holidays, right? Well, holiday
Mm-hmm.
related stories or something to that effect. And I do think it's also helpful to somewhat like, magazines where they're asking for, oh, we're going to do a food issue or something to that effect. We also are looking at, well, it's going to be 100 days or 100 days in for Mamdani, or it's 100 days, or a year into Trump, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of a
Hmm.
news peg is pretty welcome as well in terms of thinking how you can think about what pitches to send.
That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah. Are there a few examples of stories that have really worked well for you or stories that you edited that you could talk about a little bit that you thought were very strong examples of documented pieces?
Sure. So during the election, again, I think one of the things that we did work with a lot of freelancers. As a whole, I think the election was fairly successful because we had different freelance photographers on the ground. And so that
Hmm.
worked fairly well. But I also think one thing is that we were, as many of our reporters could be on the ground, we also need other stories in general about the election.
Yeah.
So one story was from a freelancer named Prajwal Butt. He talked about the taxi drivers who were really supportive of Mamdani, and he was there the night that he was elected. He was
Hmm.
able to kind of gather sources from within the uh, South Asian community, right? In terms of because a lot of the taxi drivers are South Asian, they're also immigrants. They also stood by Mamdani before he was, when he started his campaign, as he was doing this hunger strike for
Hmm.
taxi drivers. So to kind of take it from the inception to kind of all the way to, I'm trying to remember exactly where he took his speech, his victory speech, but to have that kind of scene bookended was really nice in terms of like I can bring you the story full circle, right? And
Yeah.
also it also speaks to the fact that this particular freelancer had access, right? He was able
Yeah.
to speak to this community, get access to their thoughts. It was a nice kind of like arc in terms of everything.
Hmm.
That's that was a nice piece that it was good to kind of have, especially because even though we could have probably written this with our staff writer, he was also out working the other labor aspect, right? So he's going to be a little bit busy, and this is another aspect that we would like to have covered, especially because it was such a big victory for them as much as it was for Mamdani.
Hmm.
Uh, and then let's see, we there was another freelance piece that was just pitched to us by somebody we'd never worked with, Juan Lasso,
Hmm.
and he did a story about language learning caseloads. So the number of students in the system who were needing English language learning help had quadrupled, right? And this is the kind of data that nobody's really talking about in terms of the influx of immigrant students, right? But he was able
Hmm.
to gather that data, again, try to chart it, right, by particular neighborhoods, right, and show which ones are growing exponentially in terms of how many language learners there and how much need there was for them and how much wasn't being met. So
Hmm.
this is kind of one of those things where I think if you are a data journalist or if you have some data that you're sitting on, just because you have access to it, I think it wouldn't be wrong to kind of necessarily pitch it. And even if it's not fully formed, right, I wouldn't be opposed to kind of forming the idea with that freelancer too.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty good story as well. I don't think a lot of people were talking about it, right? And a lot of people didn't really necessarily have that data. We did our
Hmm.
own story as well in in line with that, which actually spoke to a family, a number of families actually who had ELL needs, right? So there's both the data story and then we had this the actual human impact story as well.
Yeah.
And that kind of,
Interesting.
once he pitched it to us, we're like, oh, this is great, because then that kind of like puts some of the data, um, you have the data aspect to kind of corroborate a
Yeah.
lot of the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, those are both great examples because in the first case, you have the reporter who's already been tracking and following a story and has already made connections with sources and can actually provide a bit of a narrative arc to follow a story through and voices on the ground. And
Hmm.
in the other case, you have maybe a reporter you haven't worked with before, but that person is already gathering data and even if the story idea isn't fully formed yet, that it's the data is so good that you can work with that reporter on
Right.
the pitch and even think about other ways that you can jump in with other story ideas.
Yes. And I will say, I think documented is, we are a small staff, but we have a data reporter on staff who
Yeah.
does really good data analysis,
Mhm.
and she is helpful in that regard. We do have somebody who, we have like expertise in a lot of different things. So I wouldn't be opposed to, yeah, hearing those pitches if they're so inclined.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And you take pictures from all ranges of reporters from people who are starting out to more veterans, it sounds like.
we do. We do. We do get a lot of pitches from students or recently graduated students, and it isn't to say, I mean, we are a little bit more cautious, I think, now
Yeah.
in terms of, if this is a first time freelancer, we're not going to, bet the farm on them as per se.
Yeah.
But but if they have, again, it's like sometimes there are, what is really critical is like, well, if you can guarantee, and I do talk to every freelancer, or not every single one of them, but a majority of them say, we all talk to them
Mhm.
before they write their story, to understand, like, okay, this is, who are your sources, right? Are they 100% okay talking to documented? Do they
Yeah.
understand what they're getting into? And this is really critical because of the nature of what we cover, which is immigrants and immigration, and their statuses are really, as of late, very precarious, right? So
Mhm.
we ask that, it would be great if they go on the record. If not, we do not want pseudonyms. We want them to, we could do initials, right? First or last name initial. But we also really want to make sure that when we're speaking with first time, writers, things like that, that they have the sourcing down, right?
Mhm.
And I will say that's probably the biggest difference between like a veteran reporter and maybe somebody who's just pitched this for the first time, is
Mhm.
they don't kind of understand that the intricacies of kind of sourcing, and like, and how important it is to make sure that everything is like, the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted before you can actually pitch something. We
Yeah.
do offer a kill fee, I will say that much, but it's nice to know that they have done the legwork, right? Of
Mhm.
speaking to their sources and ensuring that those sources are okay with talking to them. Because sometimes, and this does happen even with our veteran reporters, right?
Mhm.
They'll pull out, right?
Right.
They'll
Right.
get cold feet or something to that effect. And we will deal with it when that time comes. But with if you're pitching, I wouldn't really be, you do have to start somewhere. So
Mhm.
I think if you have a good story and you have the sources, at least, at least three sources, right, to begin with, or
Mhm.
a data set, right, that is verifiable,
Yeah.
because we do check the data, right? Then I wouldn't, you should get into the habit of pitching. Right, right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would be, if you're really serious about being a freelance writer, uh, and developing. This is something that somebody told me a long time ago, is like, you really need to get out of the pitching game and you really need to get into the relationship game, right? You
Mm.
really need to be developing relationships with editors rather than these like one-off pitches, right? And
Mhm.
that way you can kind of start building upon your, uh, your
Yeah.
your repertoire, right? Or your expertise and things like that.
Yeah. No, that's good for them to know. It's the fact checking is so crucial always, and having your sources. you know, uh, confirmed and all of the material. But then for your work, there's even an extra layer of just the safety, the
Mm-hmm.
privacy, and making sure that the subjects, are comfortable or, know that they're talking to a journalist. So people who pitch you it sounds like they really have to be aware of that relationship
Mm-hmm.
too, with their
Mm-hmm.
sources. Can you also talk a bit about compensation for stories and also, the range of length for stories that you take too? What are
Sure.
you usually looking for in length and how much do reporters get paid for
Yeah.
them?
Yeah. So we set our rate starting at 50 cents a word.
Hmm.
And for photography, it's more negotiable, but in general, we're asking for them to go out on like a portrait session or some kind of event or something. So usually will now start at 400 for the day rate. And I will say though that a lot of this is, I think, a negotiation. And I think a
Hmm.
lot of these, because we work with so many freelancers, I'm actually surprised we don't get that many people. Well, as of late, we starting to work with freelancers, but I'm surprised not many people negotiate. I don't know.
Is that
Uh,
right?
I'm surprised,
Yeah.
but but maybe it's because our rates are, I think, fairly competitive,
Hmm.
and the length that we ask is, generally speaking, I would say we will start at like 1,000 words. I think that's like you should have a story that can be written within 1,000 words, or max stories that we accept probably like 1,500 if, through the pitch line, which isn't to say, again, I think that sometimes maybe this is unusual for documented, but we do care about the story, so sometimes it'll go longer, right? Maybe it's not 1,000 word story. Maybe at the end of the day, we've discovered we want more on this particular section or something to that effect. So then
Hmm.
it'll go a little longer on that end, which isn't to say that you should turn in your story way over word count, because that is not.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot of editors come here and that's probably one of their pet peeves. And I would agree. I think it can be, if you're turning in 1,500 words when we agree to 1,000, that's not fun. We'll just say like go back and like cut it down.
Hmm.
The other thing I was going to mention in terms of length is we do have photography. I think we try to say at least maybe 30 photos or so when you turn in your photos. But again, everything is kind of should have be a conversation. I think if we've approved your pitch, if we've liked it enough, and I will go over all of these kinds of rates and compensation and kind of the contract with the writer in advance. And then we will send the contract and then they can look it over again, right?
Hmm.
And if they agree on that, we will have even more discussions in terms of like deadline and things to that nature, right?
Hmm.
But I think if for the most part it's like 1,000 or so words. If it's a same day story or for a quick turnaround story, obviously I think we're looking for something less. So if we want to get it out quickly,
Yeah.
500 to 800 words probably, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And if it is a little longer, I'm imagining it really has to merit
Yes.
being longer, and
Hmm.
and so the writer has to pretty much know what they're doing to have that 12
Yeah.
go beyond 800 words, I guess.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. And it's also good habit to talk to your editor if you think it's going to be longer or something to that effect.
Sure.
And or if the deadline is going to be pushed back. I am also surprised, actually, maybe it's just me, at how often writers will pitch a story that it's good, but I also think personally, I would pitch something that I know I could get done by within like 2 weeks or so, at least, right? If I think,
Yeah.
that's what merits it, unless it's like a month-long story that I'm pitching, of course. But I would pitch something I know that I could get done in the date and the time frame that I either pitch to set out, and when I'm
Right.
talking with the editor after everything, you know, it's okay to push back on the editor's suggestion of like, can you get this done by this such and such time? if you don't think you can get it done by that time, then don't agree to that.
Yeah, yeah.
You just ask for more time. I would rather have something done well, right? Rather than being kept told that, oh, this isn't going to get done by this time, and it just keeps, the can
Sure.
gets keeps pushing down the road and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, that makes
Mm,
sense.
hmm.
Um, a quick question. So that you mentioned New York and New Jersey now, right? Are the two main coverage areas. And so I'm imagining most of your writers then come from those areas are from New York and New Jersey. Like, do you take writers from beyond those areas who maybe have something that's relevant to New York, or does that just depend on the story?
We have taken reporters pitches who they live in California, for
Sure.
instance, or some of them are living, yeah, outside of the New York, New Jersey area. And that's just because of the kind of reports or stories that they're writing can be done, outside of the state, right?
Yeah.
But more often than not, they are coming from New York or New Jersey. And I will
Hmm.
say, our bread and butter is New York City, but because New Jersey has Delaney Hall there, right?
Hmm.
And there's a lot of news coming from that area, of course. New Jersey is a big immigration state or immigrant state. So of course there's some implications there that people would want to know about.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't, if you can get your reporting done outside of the state but it still pertains to either New York or New Jersey, I wouldn't be opposed to hearing the pitch. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about contract? What is your contract? What are the copyright terms, and is it work for hire? And then of course,
Yes.
yeah, if people want to
So,
expand their work at some point into
yeah.
something like a podcast, how does the rights process work for you?
That's a good question. Nobody's asked us that before. I think if that were the case, you'd have to talk to us beforehand to
Sure,
understand the
sure.
rights. But one thing I keep going back is like we are slowly building up that freelancer base. So our contract, I think, is relatively standard, right?
Mhm.
And if you feel like you want to negotiate the contract because it's so standard, right, then I think it's definitely your right as a freelance writer, etc.
Mhm.
But our contract is basically your contractor, right? We own the rights to the work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And you also kind of waive liability from the work. It's, I think, in freelancer terms, it's probably not the most, how should I say, flexible,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's something because of the nature of our work. Um, that's actually so surprising, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So the stories that we want that you write for us, we want them to be with us, and we don't want you to be competing with somebody else per se. You can obviously work for other outlets, but we don't want the news to be kind of blurred in terms of what you're writing. And obviously, ethically speaking, we want to maintain our ethics and all of that. But I think one thing I was going to say is, yeah, we do have the kill fee, which I
Mhm.
mentioned. That's about 25% of the agreed upon rate.
Mhm.
And we will also, kind of discuss the deadline and all of that stuff. But one thing I think with the contract is, in terms of waiving the liability, we do work with the writers to make sure that everything is good, and we have we can't send the stories to legal in advance. So,
Mhm.
but again, I think that the contract is kind of, you know, we 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 I'm trying to go through it, but it's fairly standard, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so you have your contract in place, but every freelancer, and I always, say this to freelancers too, has a right to negotiate, and I always say you should try to negotiate. It might not work, but you can ask for
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
understand what the contract says.
It hasn't come into play too much, I will say, for the written pieces,
Yeah,
because if you're writing a very specific story about an immigration family,
yeah,
there are very few outlets who are looking, I mean, not, I shouldn't say that now, but I think, we would hope that you would like keep it with documented.
sure.
And then, but I will say, I think with photography
Hmm.
and illustration, some of that negotiation has come up a little bit more
Hmm.
in terms of like, you can only use the photography for this particular post, right? We don't want to see it out here and around. And I think that's fair. Like I said, I think if you feel that you read through the contract and something you want changed, maybe because we work with so many newer writers, they're just like, whatever, I'm just going to sign it. They don't
Right.
know that it's actually a possibility for them to
Yeah.
be like, actually, can we change the wording on this? I'm not so sure about this and stuff like that. And we'll rewrite the
Yeah.
contract. We'll be like, okay, we're okay with that. And we'll rewrite the contract. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Um, and then, in terms of just like the timeline for you, once you have accepted a pitch and the reporter's out there doing it, and then they submit the piece, how long should they expect to wait, for the edits? Do you go through multiple rounds of edits and copy edits? And what's that process like, at least if you're taking a writer through it and all the way to, finally
Ye-
getting paid and
Yeah,
all of that
sure,
too.
sure. So once you've submitted a pitch, hopefully we get back to you within a week or two from once you've submitted the pitch through the pitch form, or if you've emailed us directly and it's urgent, ideally we'll get back to you pretty quickly, right?
Mhm.
Yes, no, maybe so. Can you change this or something to that effect? But I would say more often than not, I'm probably, because of the nature of the pitches we get, they can be anywhere from like, great, can you get this done by the end of next week to this seems like something that you need a little bit more time on, and maybe it's like a month-long story or something to that effect. But it's a really good story, so we can give you that time. We're not necessarily pressed to get it out right as soon as
Right.
possible. And if they agree to that, I think that's fine. I am always amazed that freelancers are willing to work upwards of months on a story sometimes. I'm like, don't you? Because we pay usually as soon as on publication.
Got it. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
sometimes for photography, that's a little bit different. But on publication, that's you have to submit an invoice within 30 days, or excuse me, within 2 weeks, and then we will pay you within 30 days of
Hmm.
submitting the invoice. But and then in terms of the edits, I think we usually, again, there have been some times where we've had a story, I think in the queue, like a freelancer queue for maybe longer than a week and it finally gets edited. Or I think during the election that was a little tougher because, things were
Sure.
just kind of backed up. But we'll try to get edits back either the same week or within the following 2 weeks, I would say, generally speaking. And then the
Yeah.
round of edits, it's right now it's you do a first read and then it'll go to another editor who do a second read, and then hopefully that's all the editing that it needs.
Hmm.
Or if it needs to go to legal, that's another round, so that can take a
Hmm.
little bit more time if you're working on a more extensive story. And then yeah, and then we kind of like, we're finally ready for production and then it can go up pretty quickly after that. But
Yeah.
we've had things go up, you know, uh, within the week, as soon as we've gotten them, especially
Yeah.
if everything is like crystal cleared and like, great, this is perfect. And then we've had things take up to from getting the initial draft, it can take a month or plus. Yeah. And I will
Sure.
say that's also because of the nature of what the story was about. So we want to be extra careful with, is this correct? Is this right? All that stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And if a writer has not heard back from you and they pitched you, do you encourage them to pitch again? And also, if they just get a rejection, like do you have, sometimes you pitch and finally get your piece into the place that you admire, like documented. And I'm wondering what your
Mhm.
advice is for people who maybe aren't getting their pitches accepted or also Maybe just haven't heard back yet.
I think if you haven't heard back yet, it's okay to, especially if it's like a personal email, for sure you should just like, hey, what's up? Like
Editors are
things
busy.
I mean, that's kind of the mantra of everything. Editors are busy.
Yes.
Um,
And things get missed. I
and
mean,
things definitely
all the
have
time.
gotten missed for sure. I don't know how things like that happen sometimes, but I'm like, oh my gosh.
No, same with me. Email, so many emails.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So feel free to like email again. I think if it's through the pitch form, it's a little trickier. You
Yeah.
might want to, if it's been 2 weeks, I might want to try to either do it through the pitch form again, right?
Hmm.
Especially if you think it hasn't gotten any kind of response.
Hmm.
We do try to send rejection emails, of course, to
Hmm.
everybody. And I think in terms of why would your pitch not be getting approved? Why wouldn't you if you're still sending the same pitch and it's not getting approved or something to that effect, or your pitches aren't getting or landing? I think more often than not it's because of the newness factor and the
Hmm.
timeliness factor, at least for documented. You're not sharing with us anything new that we haven't read, which means you probably haven't been reading our work as of late. For instance, I think, a lot of people pitch us stories about or have about street vendors, right?
Hmm.
And they
Hmm.
say this is an undercovered community. Well, actually, we've covered it extensively. So
Sure.
maybe you should review what it is that
Review
we've
the book.
covered
Yeah.
and tell us, what is different about your particular report. And then again, the timeliness. So if it's something like, again, like going back to street vendors, oh, is there something new that's happening with them that we didn't quite see? Or is there some event or something that we should know about that maybe street vendors would be interested in, or some new kind of policy? Like say Mamdani like has something that's happening. I mean, I think we did cover this, but yeah, happening with street vendors, right? Well,
Yeah.
maybe you've heard something on the street
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
vendors in a particular subset that they're not particularly happy with. Like that's kind of, more interesting, right?
Sure.
But I will say that specificity is your friend in terms of pitches. And I like to think that if you can write a good nut graph for your story, that should be kind of like the first or second sentence to your pitch, right? Because
Hmm.
the nut graph is something that I'm not going to go Ken Armstrong and not like we don't want nut graphs, but if you have the nut graph and it has and it's good, it should be able to tell you, here's the story, here's what's important, and here's why it matters, right? And here's why it
Yeah.
matters to this particular outlet for documented and the readers and the audience that we are covering. So
Yeah.
if you're covering something within the Chinese community, here's something that's interesting, here's why it matters, and here's why it particularly matters to this particular community, right? I
Yeah.
think that would be a good place to start and showcase a impact, right? And showcase again that timeliness of the
Definitely.
particular pitch, right?
Yeah, even when you're writing a longer form piece or a feature, you always need the nut graph in your pitch, I feel,
Mm-hmm.
so the editors can just understand why we're
Mm-hmm.
pitching it to you, why now, why you. And then
Yes.
also, as you were saying earlier, always checking if they've done the story. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but so often people will pitch and not realize somebody that the publication did the story
Yeah.
2 weeks earlier
Yes.
or something.
Yes, exactly. And I think a lot of times, sometimes, so for newer, because we do get student writers,
Yeah,
sometimes they'll pitch us their thesis, and I'm
yeah,
like, I don't really. Sometimes they're good, but other
yeah,
times it's like, well, just take one aspect of that and tell
yeah,
me what's useful about that.
yeah.
So I'm
And
not going to try to condense it for you,
right.
right?
Yeah, you can't take a 20-page
Yeah.
uh, academic piece, but
Yeah.
there might be an idea in there that is worth a story, and that's up to them to figure that out, not necessarily
Yes,
their job at all.
exactly.
Um, but this has been so helpful, and I hope that you get some strong pitches after this interview, and that writers who are out there listening and admire the work of Documented as I do, feel inspired to also pitch you and to keep pitching. So thank you so much for your time and
Thank you.
that you
Yes.
do,
I
Clarissa.
do hope we get some pitches. And that's one other thing I will say is I have spoken to students and to other classes and just like outlets and things like that. And I'm always surprised that we don't get that many pitches
Yeah.
afterward. And it's like, sometimes the introductory pitch is also helpful. Like maybe you don't have a story, but you're good at X, Y, and Z, right?
Hmm.
And even if you just like introduce yourself to us, sometimes that's helpful because we've actually ran with people who it's like, hey, I've written for this outlet, this outlet, this outlet. Keep
Yeah,
me in mind if you have anything that you need, right?
definitely.
Sometimes that works, and it has worked actually for us too.
Yeah.
But I'm also surprised sometimes you just get crickets. It's like I think people are too precious with their story ideas and their
Yeah.
pitches sometimes. And it's like if you're in the work of freelancing and
Yeah.
freelancers and you want to make a living, and this is
Yeah.
a mistake that I think I made when I was younger. It's like, oh no, they're not going to take it. Like, oh, it's not perfect. It's not great,
Yeah.
right? It's like, well, just who cares? Like, just send it off. We're not gonna
That's right.
we're not here in that kind of a game. We're here to just the worst thing that we can say is no, and then you can just
That's
move
right.
on. That's it.
Yeah.
But just keep going.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. You develop that thicker skin as you keep doing that more often and realize that the no's are not always about you. But also,
Mhm.
uh, freelancing and finding your way in journalism is like actually reporting your way through it, like making the connections and
Yeah,
just having people that you can sort of that know you're there. That's one of the most important parts too.
exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, and good luck with all your stories, and we will look forward to reading more of them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Thank
one.
you,
All right.
Clarissa.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
The Freelance Journalism Podcast is a production of the Institute for Independent Journalists. Our mission is the emotional and financial sustainability of freelancers of color. Learn more about our work at theiij.com and use the code POD10 for a discount on our annual conference and other events open for registration now. Please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or both. You can find our free webinars and other offerings there, and we really appreciate your recommendation to your friends. Thanks for listening.